The projector screen flickered slightly, and I steadied my voice. And with these reinforced cross struts, we can preserve the original facade without additional steel casing, maintaining both historical integrity and seismic safety. I clicked to the next slide, praying the jitter in my hand wasn't too obvious. Across the room, the museum board members leaned in. Some nodded, others whispered quietly to each other. I had them for a moment, until Nathan Lohr cleared his throat. "Fascinating," he said, rising halfway from his chair. "But perhaps we're getting ahead of ourselves. While Cassia's enthusiasm is commendable, I think it's important we don't disregard traditional preservation methods. After all, they've stood the test of time." There it was, the passive-aggressive kill shot. I kept my face still as murmurs passed through the room. My slide, still frozen on a 3D render of the facade, hung behind me like an unfinished sentence. Nathan smiled like he was being generous. "There's beauty in restraint," he added, turning to the board. "Sometimes the best innovation is knowing when not to reinvent the wheel." I bit the inside of my cheek. He hadn't reviewed my proposal beforehand. I knew that. He didn't even pretend to. This interruption wasn't about procedure. It was about dominance, about putting me back in my place. I tried to cut in. If I could just respond, "Of course," he said, waving me off like a child about to recite a poem. "But first, let's remember that this building dates back to 1896. I'm not convinced that carbon composite reinforcement belongs anywhere near sandstone pillars. The museum deserves care, not experiments." That's when one of the board members, an older man in a tailored navy suit, tilted his head. "Excuse me," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Cassia Gray, was it?" I nodded cautiously. He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Any relation to Dorian Gray?" The room shifted. "Yes," I said, swallowing. "He's my father. That changed everything." The board member leaned back, impressed. "Well, Dorian Gray saved half the war-damaged structures in Northern Europe, including St. Agatha's Cathedral, if I'm not mistaken." Nathan's mouth pressed into a flat line. "And you trained under him?" the board member asked. "I interned on his Lisbon restoration," I replied, "but I developed this method independently. The base technique is mine." A few other heads nodded. One woman whispered to her colleague. The mood had shifted. Now they were intrigued. Now they wanted to hear more. "Well then," the board member said, gesturing. "Please, continue." I did. I walked them through the simulations, the stress models, the cost comparisons. They asked questions, good ones. And this time, no one interrupted. But the whole time, my stomach sat heavy. Not because I was nervous, because I knew none of this would be happening if my last name didn't ring bells in their memory. They hadn't listened to my work until they realized who raised me. When I finished, they clapped. One even called the plan elegant. Nathan smiled tightly, his jaw clenched, as they asked for copies of my full report. And I smiled too, politely, professionally. But inside, I was seething. They hadn't respected me until they saw my father's shadow hanging behind me. And I hated that the shadow had spoken louder than I ever could. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my couch, laptop open, staring at the simulation model, the same one I had fine-tuned for weeks. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, but I didn't touch anything. The board had been impressed, but not because of the work. They were impressed by a name, by a legacy I had tried so hard to escape. I'd made a choice when I joined Atrium Restorations. No mentions, no referrals, no backdoors. I submitted a stripped-down resume with only regional credits, no famous sites, no hints of my father's network. I wanted the chance to be hired as Cassia, not Dorian Gray's daughter, and I was. Back then, the firm had been run by Paul Chen. Quiet guy. Always wore the same brown blazer, but he cared. He noticed details. He pushed for ideas from everyone, not just the loudest in the room. Paul gave me my first real promotion. Small, but it meant something. I'd earned it. He told me once, "You're not your father. That's a good thing." And then he retired. Early. Out of nowhere. Nathan Lohr replaced him a week later. I still remember our first team meeting. He called Paul's style overly democratic. Said our job wasn't to experiment, but to preserve. And he said it like preservation meant freezing time in amber. I kept my head down at first, adjusted. But I couldn't stop noticing how quickly he shut down anything new. When I proposed a reconfigurable bracing technique, He said it was unnecessary risk. When I brought up switching from lime mortar to micro-lime for sustainability, he laughed. And when Yara introduced her lightweight composite support, something revolutionary, something she'd worked on for a year, Nathan dismissed it after 5 minutes. Looks nice on paper, he said, but theory doesn't save buildings. Yara and I bonded over that. She was a materials engineer, sharp, methodical, way more patient than me. She'd poured everything into that design, and watching Nathan brush it off like a coffee stain had lit something in both of us. We started having lunch together, griping about how anything progressive hit a wall unless it came from someone with gray hair or a famous last name. He only listens when the voice sounds familiar, Yara said one afternoon, poking at her salad. Old school, old money, or old men. I laughed. But it wasn't funny. We both knew it was true. Later that evening, as I was rinsing out my coffee mug in the office kitchen, I checked my phone. One new email from Nathan. Subject: Project Debrief, Private Meeting. The message was short. Cassia, let's schedule a 1-to-1 to discuss the museum board meeting and next steps. Tomorrow 9 a.m., my office. That was it. No congratulations, no acknowledgement. Just a summons. I stared at the screen. For 2 years, I'd built my name from scratch. Now the very thing I tried to leave behind was dragging me forward. I didn't know what Nathan wanted, but I knew it wasn't just a debrief. Something was shifting, and I was done playing along quietly. Nathan's office was too clean, not just tidy, calculated. The kind of space where everything looked like it was trying to prove something. Polished walnut desk, matte black frames on the wall, a shelf with exactly 3 books, all on classical restoration theory, spine labels barely creased. He didn't look up when I knocked. "Come in," he said, scrolling something on his screen. I stepped inside and waited. Finally, he folded his hands and leaned back, giving me a smile that felt more like a test than a greeting. "Cassia, that was quite a showing yesterday." I didn't answer. He motioned to the chair across from him. I sat. He kept the smile. The board was impressed, very impressed, and they were right to be. Your work is consistently strong, your attention to historical fidelity is sharp, and your modeling is, frankly, better than most I've seen at your level. There it was, the build-up, which is why I'd like you to lead the museum project moving forward, he said. Tone casual, like it was obvious. I raised my eyebrows. You're offering me the lead? Yes. Even though 48 hours ago you said carbon reinforcement was reckless and I was too enthusiastic. He blinked, just once. I think we can both agree the board's reaction made the value of your approach clear. No, I said, sitting forward. Let's not both agree, because none of this is about the value of my work. It's about who my father is. His jaw tightened, barely. I'm offering you a major opportunity, he said. No, you're offering me visibility, I corrected. Because now that the board sees me as Dorian Gray's daughter, you can use me to push a modern proposal without it reflecting on you. Nathan didn't respond right away, just watched me. Then, is that a no? I shook my head. It's a yes with terms, he frowned. Excuse me? I'll lead the project, but I'm not doing it alone. Yara's composite material gets a full test run. Formal testing, controlled parameters, no sabotage. He leaned back, expression unreadable. You're tying your name to a material that failed stress tests. No, I said calmly. You tied it to failure by rigging the tests. I've seen the data. He didn't deny it. You're confident it'll hold? I'm confident she deserves a fair shot, and I won't step into the spotlight unless she's there beside me. The silence stretched. Nathan tapped a finger on the desk, once, twice. Then he nodded, once. Fine, we'll set up the testing schedule. I stood. Cassia, he said as I reached the door, if you're trying to make a statement. I'm not, I said. I'm just doing the job. You should try it sometime. Back at my desk, I found Yara hunched over her laptop, headphones on, reviewing a spreadsheet. I sat beside her and said, You're getting a test run. She blinked. What? A real one. I made it a condition. Her eyes widened. Wait, did you just get promoted? I nodded slowly. She grinned. But I didn't, because I knew exactly what would come next. The whispers, the side glances, the doubts. To them, I'd skipped the line. They'd assume I rode my father's coattails. And maybe now, I had. But I wasn't climbing just for me anymore. I thought the promotion would feel like momentum. But 2 weeks in, it felt more like an invisible rope, pulling me forward in public and tying my hands behind the scenes. Nathan still controlled the broader direction of the museum project. While I technically led our phase, he kept inserting himself into stakeholder meetings, introducing my work like it was a footnote under his vision. Every suggestion from junior staff was brushed aside before it even made it onto the whiteboard. Unless it came from someone with a title or gray in their hair, it was a non-starter. Same as always. The test on Yara's material went ahead, but it was clear from the start that Nathan was never invested in the outcome. He scheduled the stress test for 7 a.m., gave us a tech team he barely briefed, and when the initial results came in slightly under tolerance, under conditions twice the industry standard, he used it as proof. "See," he said in the review, "looks interesting on paper, but it folds under pressure." "No," Yara said, standing at the far end of the table, shoulders squared. "You ran a thermal spike through it before loading." He looked over his glasses like she was being cute. We tested durability under realistic strain. I saw the fire in her eyes, the frustration barely restrained. She didn't yell, she didn't storm out. She just stared at the numbers in silence, then quietly gathered her reports and walked out. Nathan turned to me with a smile, like it was done. "Settled. Back to stone and steel then." I didn't answer. Back at my desk, I found her there, waiting. "They never wanted it to pass," she said. "Just needed to say they tried." I sat down slowly. "I know," she looked at me then, really looked. "But they'll keep using you. Your last name opens doors." That stung more than I wanted to admit. She didn't say it to hurt me. She said it because it was true. Later that night, I stood in my kitchen, staring at my phone. The light from the fridge cast a blue hue across the floor. I scrolled to my father's name and hesitated, then tapped. He picked up on the second ring. "Cassia?" "Hi," I said, trying not to sound as tired as I felt. "You okay?" "No," I said. "Not really." I told him everything, about the test, about Nathan, about how the project was already shaping up to be more politics than progress. He didn't interrupt, just listened. And when I finished, there was a pause. Then he said, "Let me guess. You thought if you earned it the right way, people would respect you the right way too." I didn't answer. He sighed. "Cassia, you can't change who they see when they look at you, but you can decide who benefits from the view." I blinked. What does that even mean? It means if the door opens because of your name, drag someone else through it with you. You don't have to pretend you don't have privilege. You just have to use it better than they ever did. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, feeling the weight of what I already knew. "I'm not interested in climbing if it's only for me," I said. "Good," he said. "Then climb louder." The next day, the annual innovation grant was posted on the firm's internal board. It was big. Funding, exposure, independence from department heads. Most years, Nathan handpicked the submissions that made it to final round. But the application this year allowed for any full-time employee to submit a concept anonymously for blind review. My fingers hovered over the mouse as I read the details. This wasn't just a way forward. It was a way around him, and I suddenly knew exactly what to do. It took us 4 days to get the proposal into shape. 4 days of late-night coffee, whiteboard scribbles, and muttered curses over printer jams. But when it was done, it was solid. Not just good, undeniable. I had the preservation modeling. Yara brought the updated material stress profiles. Together, we wove it into a new stabilization method that outperformed every legacy technique on the books. It was lightweight, adaptive, cost-efficient, and just complex enough to overwhelm anyone who hadn't lived inside the idea. Exactly what we needed. Yara leaned back from her laptop as she saved the final draft. "So how do we make sure it gets past the first filter?" "We don't," I said. "We make sure Nathan does." She frowned. "Wait, what?" I turned my screen toward her and pointed to the top of the form. "Lead submitter, Nathan Lohr." "You're kidding." "Nope," her eyes narrowed. "You're naming him as the project head." "He'll love the optics," I said. "And the board requires the lead to present if we make the final shortlist." Understanding dawned slowly. "He'll walk straight into the review," I smiled. "And when they ask questions, he can't answer." "He crashes." I nodded. Yara exhaled, then laughed. That's cruel. Brilliant, but cruel. Cruel is what he did to your work. She tapped her pen on the desk. You really think he'll sign off on it? He won't need to. The first round is anonymous. He'll get the congratulatory email, assume someone on his team submitted it as a tribute to his genius, and ride the wave until it hits a rock. Which is? The final panel presentation, I said, where technical expertise is mandatory. That's where they separate managers from engineers. We submitted the application by noon. 2 days later, the shortlist was posted. Our proposal, titled Gray Composite Methodology for Facade Stabilization, was top 3. No author names listed yet, but Nathan's inbox would have buzzed with a congratulatory memo by 9 a.m. By lunch, he was strutting through the office like he'd already won. Great to see innovation being recognized, he said to anyone within earshot. I've always said risk-tolerant design thinking has its place. I nearly choked on my tea. He held an impromptu brainstorm session in the big conference room, inviting junior staff to refine the language for the final round. Yara and I sat in the back, saying nothing, watching as he tried and failed to explain a stress distribution model we'd designed from scratch. He mispronounced viscoelastic twice. Afterward, I found him in the hall, flipping through the printout of our proposal. Excellent work, he said, tapping the cover with a smug grin. The judges are going to eat this up. You understand the stress path diagram? I asked. Of course, he said quickly, because it's built around material behavior under dynamic seismic pressure, composite fatigue rates, and deformation curves. That'll come up. His smile faltered for half a second. Naturally. Glad you're ready, I said, walking away before I laughed out loud. Later that day, Yara found me by the copy machine. He's panicking, she whispered. I heard him ask Tori what strain energy dissipation meant. Did she tell him? She said it depends on the model, I smirked. Good answer. That night, we stayed late. Yara adjusted the visuals on the stress maps. I refined the language in the appendix. We left just enough breadcrumbs in the proposal that only someone intimately familiar with the research could defend it. Nathan had the title, but we had the knowledge. And soon, the board would see the difference. The panel room was quieter than I expected. 10 chairs lined a long table at the front, each occupied by a museum commissioner, preservation specialist, or senior architect with decades in the field. They'd all received our proposal ahead of time, blind reviewed, rigorously scored, and now narrowed to 3 finalists. And at the center podium, fiddling with the slide remote, was Nathan Lohr. He was wearing his best navy suit, crisp, sharp, expensive looking. His confidence was performative, but shaky. I knew the signs, the extra clearing of his throat, the constant glance at his notes. He had read the words, but he didn't understand them. And in 15 minutes, that would matter. He clicked to the opening slide. Good afternoon, he began, voice smooth. Today I'm excited to present a cutting-edge solution for facade preservation that balances structural integrity with aesthetic fidelity. I sat in the audience with Yara, 2 rows from the front. Neither of our names were on the docket. Not officially, but they'd call us soon enough, Nathan continued, gesturing at a render of our composite-braced arch model. Our approach leverages modern materials without compromising the original envelope of the structure. As you'll see, this method offers both economic efficiency and enhanced resilience. The panel listened politely. One of the commissioners jotted something down. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A woman near the center raised her hand. Mr. Lohr, could you elaborate on the deformation rate of the primary material under cyclical thermal load, specifically in climates where surface temperature fluctuates more than 40 degrees in a 24-hour period? Nathan blinked. He opened his mouth, paused, then smiled. Of course. Well, the, composite resists typical fluctuations because of its, hybrid density configuration, which stabilizes under pressure. Yara winced. The commissioner's eyebrow lifted a full inch. Hybrid density configuration? Nathan chuckled awkwardly. I mean, it stabilizes through lamination. Silence. Another panelist spoke up. Who engineered the material model? Nathan looked down at his notes like the answer was hiding there. Then, it was developed internally by our team. That was enough. The chair of the panel set down his pen. We'd like to hear directly from the engineers who developed the methodology. Would you mind bringing them forward? Nathan hesitated. For a fraction of a second, I thought he might try to bluff again. Then he gave a tight nod. Cassia Gray and Yara Shaw, if you'll join me, he said. We stood, walked to the front. Yara took the clicker. I opened my notebook. And then, for the next 11 minutes, we explained everything. We broke down the composite's behavior under strain, its energy dissipation curve, the seismic modeling that made it more adaptable than steel in micro-fracture-prone sandstone. Yara fielded a materials chemistry question like she'd been waiting her whole life to be asked. By the end, the same commissioner who'd raised an eyebrow was now nodding. Brilliant, she said, and cost-effective too. The chair spoke next. This proposal is not only viable, it's essential. The development team deserves recognition. We stepped back. They deliberated for only 5 minutes. When they returned, the decision was unanimous. Our project had won. As the applause filled the room, I caught Nathan's expression, still smiling, still posing. But behind the eyes, something hollow. The board praised him for supporting such promising innovation, not realizing he'd been dragged along for the ride. But the panel? They shook our hands, asked for business cards, called us by name. This time, the credit was ours, and everyone saw it. Winning the innovation grant felt like a turning point. For a moment, I let myself believe it meant we'd cleared the hardest hurdle. But real change doesn't happen on stage. It happens in meetings. Slow, subtle, brutal. Implementation began 2 weeks after the award announcement. Stakeholder sessions, supply chain negotiations, integration schedules. It should have been straightforward. After all, we had a working design, board approval, and funding. But Nathan wasn't done clinging to control. In the first strategy meeting, he introduced the project like he'd conceived it himself. Our team will begin phase 1 next week, he said, gesturing toward the diagram I had created. We're focusing on legacy preservation, respecting what's already worked. I raised my hand. Actually, the first step is pre-surface treatment using the composite binder. If we wait until structural bracing, we'll lose material cohesion. Nathan barely glanced at me. We'll revisit that once we see the full site conditions. I looked around the table. Museum curators, engineers, consultants. Some looked confused. Others scribbled down my words, not his. Over the next few weeks, this became a pattern. Nathan would open the meetings, paint in broad strokes, and try to steer everything back toward traditional integrity. He refused to use our terms: composite lattice, thermal flex tolerance, in situ mold casting. He kept saying things like, let's not overcomplicate the approach. But the structure didn't care about simplicity, and neither did the problems. The first major issue came when we uncovered a structural cavity behind the northeast column. It wasn't in any of the original blueprints, an empty pocket where there should have been brick. Left alone, it could have collapsed during reinforcement. Nathan's solution? We seal it and apply stone reinforcement, quick and safe. Yara nearly laughed. That would double the weight on a compromised pillar. He turned to her, annoyed. Then what do you propose? She pulled out her tablet, tapped the screen, and spun it around. Use the flexible composite mesh. Wrap the cavity like a sling, anchor to the inner struts, and inject our microbond fill through reverse casting. Nathan blinked. That's not tested. It's literally the design we won with, I said, voice flat. The lead structural consultant nodded. Let's do that. It's smart. That's when it shifted. From that day forward, stakeholders stopped turning to Nathan for answers. They started directing technical questions to Yara and me. First, it was occasional. How will this respond to seismic flex? Then it was constant. Can you explain the composite bonding at the base layer? At one meeting, a preservation lead asked, can we speak with Cassia directly before we approve the wall injection strategy? Nathan was sitting right there. His face didn't show it, but I saw it in his posture. Less lean, more rigid. Less command, more containment. He was losing control of the room. Later that week, we met with the full museum board for a progress report. Nathan began the presentation, but 2 minutes in, one commissioner politely interrupted. I'd love to hear from the engineers who developed the material. Cassia? Yara? He stepped aside. No protest, no smile, just silence. Afterward, Yara and I walked back to our office. She grinned as she held the door open. He's slipping. He knows it, I said. He's still got the title. Titles don't answer technical questions. And that was the truth. For every outdated answer Nathan gave, we had a better one. For every crisis he tried to patch with old methods, we had a solution that worked. He hadn't just lost the spotlight. He'd lost the room, and the room wasn't giving it back. It started with a single phone call. The lead commissioner from the museum project rang me directly. A rare thing in a firm where everything usually filtered through department heads like Nathan. "Cassia," he said, his voice warm. "I wanted to speak with you personally before tomorrow's press conference." I froze mid-step in the hallway. "Press conference?" "We're going public with the success of the facade stabilization," he said. "The model you and your colleague developed, it's become a blueprint. Other institutions want it. And we're planning regional replication." My throat went dry. "You mean other museums?" "Yes. 3 of them so far. We're creating an advisory task force. I want you to lead it." He paused, then added, "Exclusively." I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my voice. "What about Nathan?" "He'll be acknowledged for overseeing the original project, of course," the commissioner said. "But the technical credit and the advisory leadership belongs to the creators." I swallowed hard. "Thank you." The next morning, the press conference was streamed live from the museum's west atrium. My name was mentioned 5 times in the opening 10 minutes, Yara's twice, Nathan's once, briefly, as the project sponsor. When the lead commissioner gestured to the screen behind him and said, "We're proud to announce that this year's innovation leader for regional restoration will be Cassia Gray," I heard it. Not applause, but silence from Atrium's row. And then, the shift began in earnest. Back at the office, the CEO sent out a firm-wide memo. It was brief, polished, and soaked in corporate diplomacy. "We're pleased to announce the formation of a new Restoration Innovation Unit to spearhead sustainable, forward-facing preservation methods. This initiative will be led by Cassia Gray, with Yara Shah as Deputy Director. No warning, no discussion. Just a new division, built from the bones of what Yara and I had already proven." Nathan wasn't mentioned. I sat at my desk rereading the message while teams across the office whispered in low voices. Some congratulated me in passing, some just stared. Yara leaned over from her desk. "He hasn't come out of his office since the email went out." "Give it time," I said. "He'll find a way to spin it." But he didn't. Not this time. Later that day, the CEO called a meeting, small, invite only. Just me, Yara, and Nathan. He walked in stiffly, face neutral. "I've spoken with the board," the CEO said. "Nathan, you'll retain your title as Director of Traditional Projects. Your experience in legacy restoration is still valuable." Nathan nodded slowly. "Of course. But moving forward, all innovation initiatives, including grant applications and pilot programs, will go through Cassia's unit." His jaw tensed. Yara and I said nothing. The meeting ended in 10 minutes. Back at our new corner office, 2 desks, no title games, I sat down and let the weight of it settle in. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Finally. Nathan still had his title, still had his office. But what he didn't have was influence. The board had chosen the future, and this time the future had a name. Mine. 3 weeks after the reorg, Nathan knocked on my door. I almost didn't recognize the sound. No one knocked on our glass office anymore. They just waved or slipped in. Because now people wanted to be in this room. I looked up from my laptop. Yara glanced over, then quickly busied herself in the shared folder, like she wasn't very obviously listening. Nathan stepped in, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a coffee cup he hadn't touched. "Cassia," he said, "do you have a moment?" His tone wasn't smug or forced. It was unsure. I nodded slowly. "Sure." He took the chair across from my desk, sat, then stared down at the floor like it had the words he needed. "I wanted to talk about possibly transferring to your division." The room went still. I blinked. "You want to join the innovation unit?" He nodded once. "I'd like to contribute, meaningfully." That word hung in the air. I kept my face neutral, but inside I was scrambling to make sense of it. Nathan, the same man who dismissed every new idea unless it came from someone wearing his shoes, now asking to be part of the very thing he tried to suffocate. Why, I asked, not out of spite, but because I genuinely wanted to hear him say it. He exhaled slowly. Because I was wrong, about a lot of things, and maybe it's time I stop clinging to what I know and start listening to what I don't. That part, at least, sounded honest. Still, I didn't move. I didn't say yes. After a pause, I leaned back. If you come here, you'll be under someone else's lead. There's no hierarchy on this team. You bring what you have and leave the ego behind. I understand. And I'm not putting you on some showpiece task so you can feel important again. He nodded. I'm not asking to be important. I tilted my head. Good. Then I stood and walked over to Yara's desk. She looked up, already hiding a smile. Nathan's requested to join our division, I said. Yara raised her eyebrows, just enough to register amusement. I told him we have no room for titles, I added, but we could use someone on the testing side. Stress modeling, data entry, composite sampling. That'd be my team, she said simply. I turned to Nathan. If you're serious, you'll report to Yara. She'll assign your workload, review your documentation, and expect you to follow every test protocol. He didn't even flinch. Understood. Great, I said. We'll get your access updated. He stood. Thank you. And then, just before he turned to go, he looked Yara in the eye. I dismissed your work. I was wrong. I'd like the chance to earn back your respect. Yara didn't smile, but she didn't look away. We'll see, she said. After he left, she leaned toward me and whispered, You just made him my direct report. I grinned. Poetic, isn't it? She leaned back in her chair, finally smiling. I'm going to make him count bolts for a week. Sounds fair. And for the first time since this all began, it truly felt like we were rebuilding something better, one assignment at a time. Nathan's first week in the innovation unit was bumpy. He showed up early every day, neatly dressed, notebooks in hand. But habits don't unlearn themselves overnight. On day 2, he tried to improve one of Yara's test workflows by streamlining the documentation. She quietly changed it back without a word. On day 4, he spoke over a junior engineer during a brainstorming session. Yara gave him a look that could freeze lava, but to his credit, he noticed, and he adjusted. He asked questions he never would have bothered with before. He double-checked assumptions. He started listening. Slowly, awkwardly, Nathan began to learn. The lab team warmed up to him faster than I expected. Maybe because he didn't hide his confusion. He owned it. I don't know what any of these numbers mean yet, he admitted one afternoon, holding up a printout of composite fatigue curves. But I'm going to learn. He shadowed Yara during material testing, scribbling notes like a student. And for once, his questions weren't rhetorical. He wasn't trying to assert control. He was trying to understand. One afternoon, I found him sitting with Mina, our youngest hire, watching her walk through a live stress sim. Why use a hybrid mesh instead of traditional reinforcement, he asked. She hesitated, nervous. It distributes pressure more gradually along the edge curves. Older models overcompensate and cause early cracks. Nathan nodded, thoughtful. Makes sense. Thanks for walking me through that. After she walked away, he looked up and saw me at the door. Didn't know you were there, he said. Didn't want to interrupt, I replied. He smiled faintly. I see now how much I didn't see before. I didn't say anything. That evening, well after most of the team had left, Nathan knocked on my door again, this time holding no coffee cup, no folder, nothing. Got a minute? I closed my laptop. Sure, he sat down. For a long moment, he didn't speak, just looked out the window at the downtown skyline, fading into orange and gray. When I first got here, he said, I thought tradition made me right by default. That the past was proof. I waited. But I used that belief to shut people out, especially you and Yara. He looked over at me. His face was tired, but not in defeat. In humility? I wanted to say I'm sorry, he said, not just for the way I treated you during the pitch, for everything. For dismissing what I didn't understand. For thinking the only ideas worth hearing were mine. I let the silence settle between us. Then I said, You weren't the first person to think that, but you might be the first to admit it out loud. He nodded slowly. I don't expect a clean slate. I just wanted to say it. I leaned back in my chair. You know, it's not about erasing the past. It's about proving you can grow from it. He looked at me then, and for once, there was no trace of ego, No posture, just a man trying to be better. I'll keep showing up, he said. Good, I said, because that's what this place is now. We build what comes next, together. As he left the room, I realized something. The real win wasn't the project. It wasn't the grant. It wasn't even the new division. It was this moment. Because I hadn't just fought for a seat at the table, I had built a new one. And somehow, even the ones who tried to block the door were now pulling up chairs, not out of fear, but out of respect. That was the real victory. Not revenge. Change.